Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel and welcome to my omnibus series. I've got so many of these omnibuses that are going to come out so that you'll be able to listen to an hour's worth of stories, which I know you're going to love. You know, the thing is that telling stories is such a fine art, and it's something that was practiced hundreds of years ago when people didn't have the technology that we have today. And everyone would gather around the fire and listen to a wonderful story. And also, what is so wonderful about a story is that personally, I think it is the best way to go to sleep. Every night when I go to bed, I always listen to stories. And that's something that parents used to do with their children. It's something that they still do with their children. There's nothing better than a good story. And so I hope you're going to enjoy this series. And before we start, I just want to say, do subscribe to my channel because you don't want to miss out on anything. Because I'm in for the long haul and I want to make sure that you get the most stunning stories to go to bed with at night or to listen to when you want to be one of those people sitting beside the fire and listening. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and let's get started. I hope you're going to enjoy the omnibus. Dear Sarah and all your lovely listeners, my name is Charlotte, although people call me Lottie for short. I am from Clarksburg, West Virginia, and it was during the COVID-19 epidemic that my mother decided that my grandmother should move away from her retirement home and in with us. She was naturally worried about my grandmother being exposed to the virus because she's in her 80s and as a result is more vulnerable than most to succumb to its inevitable dangers. It has been lovely having my gran around, and she's such a fun person to have in our home. One day my sister and I were watching a television show called Finding Bigfoot. My gran was sitting on the sofa and knitting, and then her face went as white as a sheet, and she looked at me and said, "Those creatures are real. I've seen them myself many times when I was younger, but I never told anyone about it in case they thought I'd lost my marbles." So this is the story she recounted to me that I believe you and your listeners will find intriguing. In those days, it was the late 50s, I was living in a cabin in the countryside with my husband. We had ubiquitous trees, rolling hills and beautiful valleys with plenty of outdoor space on our land. One day I was washing dishes at the sink. Even in those days I had a lovely kitchen with a large window overlooking my kitchen garden, where I grew a large range of vegetables like carrots, tomatoes, spinach, potatoes, lettuces, beans and pumpkins. Those vegetables were so much sweeter and more delicious than the stuff we buy today. My tomatoes were so different to the tomatoes we taste now. It was like an explosion of delicious sweetness in your mouth, maybe because the soil was so much richer back then. I could see the joy on my grandmother's face as she recalled those wonderful early memories of her younger days. Suddenly something got my attention because I noticed this large cinnamon brown form sitting on my vegetable patch and pulling my carrots up by the roots and eating them, roots and all. At first I thought it was a bear because it was well covered with hair, but I suddenly noticed how long those arms were, and I could distinctly see human hands. The creature got up on his two legs and walked over to my tomato plants. It was then that I realized he was not a bear. The first thing I felt was total shock and disbelief, because I did not know what this creature was, and that anything like this even existed in North America. If it did, I had never heard of it. What was it, I wondered? I was so intrigued and curious about the creature, but I was never afraid, not ever, not even once. The creature gave me the impression of being a gentle soul that was of great intelligence. I think the thing that fascinated me about this creature was his distinctly human traits. Although there was certainly some primate in his genealogy, that was very clear to me. All I can say is that I felt privileged to be seeing a creature like this that I am sure not many people have seen, and it excited me a lot. It made me feel special because this creature had revealed itself to me. Why? I do not know. The creature was tucking into my tomatoes and eating them like an apple. Suddenly I think he must have sensed I was watching him because he looked up at me directly through the window with the kindest, most beautiful brown eyes. In those seconds, our eyes met, and I tried to tell him telepathically that he was welcome to my vegetables. I know it sounds crazy, but I felt that he knew that what I was saying. He did not run away, but walked over to the beans and squatted on the ground with his back feet and continued to eat. All the time he must have felt me watching him, but he wasn't concerned, not one little bit. After he finished eating, his eyes turned to look at me, almost as if he was thanking me, and then he literally glided over the fence into the surrounding valleys with such grace and speed. It was beautiful to watch. Over several years, that creature was a regular and a constant visitor in my garden, much like our feathered friends. It surprised me that he felt so comfortable around me. But if he did see the figure of my husband through the kitchen window coming into the kitchen, he would dart away very quickly and vanish from sight. That creature was fast, and when he ran, it was like the wind. He would move so fast, swinging his long arms backwards and forwards, as if he was marching. He was beautiful to watch because of his incredible grace. One of his strides was equivalent to 5 of our steps, and he would scale our 6-foot wall by just walking over it as if it was nothing. One day in winter, when the ground was covered in snow, I was surprised to see the creature squatting there and just looking up at me, and once again our eyes met. He stood there looking at me and then glided away on his long, densely muscular legs. I really got the impression that he was saying goodbye. Maybe he was moving away, I thought. I remember feeling desperately sad in those moments. I would say that 5 years went by and there was no trace of the creature, no sighting of him at all, and it was very sad for me because I truly missed him. But one day, as I was washing the dishes, there he was, larger than life, sitting in my vegetable bed as if he had never left. This time he was with a female and a little childlike one that I imagined was their young sprog. All 3 of them were looking at me through the kitchen window, and I felt sure he was bringing his family to me to say hello and to introduce me to them. It really was the most wonderful feeling. I felt so humbled that this creature trusted me and thought so much of me that he wanted me to see his beautiful family. I noticed that over the 5 years he had grown a great deal. He had gained height, weight and girth and was now about 7 foot tall and 7 foot across. The female, I noticed, had small breasts, and she was about 6 foot and very slender, but very strong looking, while the little one was very cute, curious and comical, and I guess he was 4 foot tall. The female had a little auburn tint to her hair, and it was very mop-like in appearance compared to the other 2. The little one was exactly the same cinnamon brown colour of his father. That year I saw the family a few times. Sometimes I would leave apples, bananas and nuts out for them, which I would tell they really appreciated. One day I left out a jar of peanut butter for them, and the juvenile ran off with it. I watched him pull himself on top of a tree branch with one long arm. Then he sat on the branch, opened the bottle, throwing the top on the ground like it was a spinning wheel. Then with long, eager fingers, he dived into the jar and coated his fingers with a thick layer of sticky peanut butter. He licked it off his fingers with such appreciation, as if it was the most scrumptious ice popsicle he had ever tasted. I got the impression that he was not about to share this peanut butter with anyone, come what may. Mum was not having any of it, and I watched her chattering angrily with her little sprog up in the tree, and I could even hear by the tone of her voice that she was not happy with her little one. Looking at the way the creature climbed down the branch onto his mother's shoulders and reluctantly handed her the jar of peanut butter, I could tell he was in trouble. He hung his head in shame and avoided any eye contact with his mother once he was on the ground. In fact, he continued to stare at the ground, avoiding any eye contact at all for a very long time. It was hilarious to watch, it really was. One day my husband and I were moving to another cabin that was several miles away from our original one, and I never thought in a million years I would see those creatures again, and that broke my heart. But somehow they found me. I don't know how, but they did. Maybe it was through their sense of smell, I don't know. But one day in my new cabin, I saw all 3 of them again, and they visited my garden several times. but then one day they just never visited again. I think they moved away or went to another part of the world, but I rarely missed them. Did you ever tell Grandad about the creatures? I asked. No, never, my grandmother told me. You see, for some reason they did not want him to see them. Whether they were afraid of him or not, I have no idea, but they kept well out of his way. I do remember your grandfather telling me that someone had been in our vegetable patch who had enormous feet because he had found a muddy print in the sand. He went out into the garden to measure the footprint, and he told me that it could not be human because the feet were 19 inches in size. He was floored by that, I remember, and he was shocked that the feet were bare. One time he also commented that he had been hearing whistling in the garden and was concerned we had a trespasser on our land. He did look around our property but found nothing, only a big ball of brown hair that he found attached to a broken branch in a tree in our garden. I remember that hair mystified him greatly. I knew that that hair was from the creature because of its cinnamon colour and texture of it. Did your neighbours ever see the creatures? I asked. Not as far as I know. I doubt that anyone saw them. And if they did, I doubt that they would have told us. Do you think those Bigfoots are still alive today? I asked my grandmother. I doubt it, she said, unless they do have a long life expectancy. But in my experience, large animals do not live the longest lives. Do not forget, these creatures are huge, and that would predispose them to shorter lifespans, I imagine, she said. I mean, look at large dogs, for instance. They live half as long as small ones do, and sometimes Great Danes can only live 5 to 7 years. I'm no animal expert, but yes, I think he's more than likely deceased. I would imagine that maybe he has some great-great-grandchildren hanging around somewhere. I really hope so. Why do you think some people have really terrifying experiences with Sasquatches, Granny? I asked. I cannot speak for other people, she said, only for myself. I can assure you the creatures I saw had the loveliest, gentle, docile, easygoing natures. I know they would have never harmed me, and I do believe if I had been in trouble, they would have even gone as far as to help me. I do think they do like to be left alone, and I think they are elusive, because otherwise everybody would see them all the time. I imagine them to be territorial. I suppose, like humans, you get different personality traits. I mean, look at the people locked up in our prison systems. Some of them have engaged in brutal, heinous crimes and have no compassion in their hearts at all. There are a lot of evil people out there, but many of them we never get to meet because invariably they are made to account for their crimes, at least we hope they are. If you get humans so evil, why not Bigfoots too? Why should we be the only ones exclusive at being evil? If they do share some of our genealogy and human dispositions, why should we be surprised by the different encounters that people have? Just like our experiences with different people, so are our experiences with different Bigfoots. That's my story. Well, thank you so much for that wonderful, wonderful story. I was actually just talking about that just now and saying that I really believe that Bigfoots do have different personality types. And it's just so true, because if you look at human beings, we're all so different. And you get really lovely people and you get not so lovely people. You get people who are genuinely kind and people who are selfish. You get people who are evil and people who are good. And so why should it be any different with the Sasquatch and the Bigfoot? I absolutely 100% agree with it. Because I have got so many people telling me about the most remarkably loving encounters. So there are different Bigfoot out there. You can have a really negative experience with a Bigfoot and a very positive one. And let's hope that any of us who have encounters with them will have a positive encounter if we're lucky enough to meet the hairy man. Dear Sarah and all your listeners, I am a policeman who has never come forward about my Bigfoot encounter, but with people writing to you with the assurance of discretion, I thought this would be my moment to come clean about my encounter with the hairy man. I do appreciate this promise of confidentiality on your part, because in my profession, believing in such a thing like a Sasquatch would likely cause me to become a laughingstock among my colleagues, and most certainly have my credibility undermined as a police officer. My Bigfoot encounter happened at a property near Paxton Ridge, Walton Rowan County in West Virginia. I got a call out to this beautiful farmhouse that was situated on 450 acres of rural land. It was a spectacular property if I ever saw one. It was truly a dreamy place to behold, with stunning views overlooking gloriously green rolling hills, meadows and stunning valleys, complemented by natural wooded areas of thriving forest. This was an ideal habitat for natural wildlife such as wild-tailed deer, grouse, turkey and other small game, with of course the inevitable water sources of beautiful streams and ponds that really are quite breathtaking to look at in this part of the world. I arrived at the farmhouse to be greeted by the young farmer who called himself Will, and he was in a terrible state about the large quantities of animal feed that were vanishing from his storage barn. He took me to the barn, which was locked, but something or someone had literally opened the barn, almost as if it was a can of sardines, because the roof had been mysteriously pulled apart, and the area around the barn was strewn with roof rafters and other fallen debris. "When did this happen?" I asked the farmer. "Last night," he said. "Surely," I said, "you must have heard something, like your dogs barking and your horses whinnying. This kind of chaos must have made a raucous noise." I have hearing aids," said the farmer. "I'm actually quite deaf without them. Last night I took them off before I went to bed. When I was asleep, I usually rely on my wife to wake me up if there's any kind of commotion on the property. She's a light sleeper, you see." "Are you saying that your wife heard nothing?" I asked. "Oh, she's not here," said the farmer. "She's in Tuscany for a 2-week course learning how to cook authentic Italian." I knew from what the farmer was telling me that last night on his farm must have been a noisy affair, and he was sound asleep through the whole ordeal. What was more extraordinary was why a whole roof had been torn apart so savagely just to steal a few bags of animal feed. The whole thing seemed extremely bizarre. What was more crazy than anything else was how the roof rafters had been torn away from the roof so violently, in a way that seemed almost humanly impossible. But who or what could have done this amount of damage, I wondered. "Look, sir," I said, "while your wife is away, I would strongly advise you to sleep with your hearing aids in, so that you can be alerted by your dogs if someone is on your property." He agreed. I searched the area around the barn and took some photographs, and I cannot say I saw any signs to indicate who the intruder was. "I'm on night shift tonight, so call me out here, if there's any strange activity on your farm," I said. That night appeared to be uneventful for me until I got a call from Will, the farmer, whom I'd seen earlier in the day, and it was at 11 p.m. at night. This time the young farmer sounded terrified on the phone. "The intruder's here. The dogs are making a huge commotion, and there are these loud crashing sounds. I went out, officer, to see what was going on. There was this huge monster standing on my barn roof, and he was tearing that roof up in his hands into shreds like it was nothing. You see, officer, I placed the animal feed in there this morning, and that animal, whatever that creature is, he must have smelt it. That's why he's breaking open into the other barn now." "Did you shoot at the intruder with some warning shots?" I asked him. "No, of course I did not," said the voice. "Get here, officer. Come here at once. There is no way that I can deal with this thing on my own. And I do think you should bring backup. This creature is highly dangerous and volatile, I imagine." I was puzzled. What on earth was going on at Will's farm, and who was it tearing the barn roof off with such a brutal force? It seemed so over the top to me, but I knew that whatever this thing was, it had to be dangerous. I called my fellow police officer Ryan to come with me to the property, and when we arrived I could hear dogs barking and huge crashing sounds everywhere. It was dark, but luckily with a full moon we could see clearly, and the outside lights of the barn provided a clear lighting for us. So armed with our police rifles, we ran to the scene, and we saw a massive creature standing on the roof, carrying 2 weighty bags of feed on his shoulders. I could hardly believe what I was seeing. The creature looked like something out of a monster movie and had no place in our reality. He was hideous to look at, and was so gargantuan I could hardly believe what my eyes were seeing. "What the heck is that?" came Ryan's horrified voice. The creature was bipedal. That was as clear as day. At a guess, I'd say he was over 1,000 pounds and over 11 foot tall, and his chest and torso must have measured at least 8 feet across. I know that sounds incredulous to believe, but that is the God's honest truth. The creature had humanoid and ape-like characteristics, with a large head that was shaped like a cone and telltale long arms that are typical of the ape species. Only these arms were gargantuan. Everything about this creature was larger than life, and one could see at a glance that he had great power and superhuman strength. He was covered from head to toe with dark auburn hair, apart from his facial area, which I noticed had a skin of a pinkish hue. The face was crinkled and thickly textured, with deep furrows on the forehead. The creature had a flattened, squashed nose that reminded me of a pug dog. But the worst thing of all were those brown, predatory eyes that terrified me beyond words. The creature surveyed us, gazing up at him on the rooftop and aiming our rifles at him. He looked at us with eyes filled with fury, rage, and revenge, and he let out the hugest scream that was so terrifying that I shat my pants. When he screamed, he sounded like a woman being murdered. It was a sound so horrendous that it caused my whole body to spasm. I could see Ryan staring up at the beast with an expression of heightened terror on his face. We fired some shots at the creature, and he literally jumped from the scaffolding on the roof and landed on the ground with the 2 large feed bags balancing across his shoulders. The way he landed was so smooth and fluid, like a cat jumping off a kitchen surface to the floor. The creature lunged at me and threw me across the ground, where I went flying through the air and landed on several piles of stacked hay. The only thing wounded was my pride, but that was because the hay had softened my fall. I dread to think what the outcome would have been without that haystack. We watched the creature tearing over the valleys on an uphill stance, and he literally glided over those fields into the woods with unbelievable grace for a creature of such massive size. We fired warning shots after him and then followed him into the woods, calling for immediate backup from the police force. As we ventured into the woods, all was eerily quiet. You could literally hear a pin drop, and there were no signs of animal life or any nightly chorus from the crickets. I suddenly knew the creature was close by. I could hear his heavy breathing and feel the eyes staring at me. However, in the dark woods with only torches for light, it was incredible, and it was too difficult to see clearly, making us feel all the more vulnerable and exposed. Ryan and I still aimed up our rifles from side to side, just waiting for the predator to suddenly leap out at us. As you can imagine, we were stricken with terror, and our whole bodies were shaking and convulsing with nerves and adrenaline. Suddenly we saw the dark, shadowy form of the creature running backwards in the woods like a train on full throttle. I mean, who can run backwards at such a speed? It was extraordinary. All the time its eyes were watching our rifles as it dived into the undergrowth and finally vanished from our sight. When the police backup did arrive, the creature had already long since vanished, and there were no traces of him to be seen. Ryan and I told the force that a bear attack had caused all this chaos. The officers seemed puzzled by the carnage caused by the bears. I overheard one officer say, "Bears cannot get up on a roof and cause damage like this. It's not possible for them to physically do this. They are clearly lying to us." The other officer replied, "You bet they're lying through their teeth. I wonder what really happened." Ryan and I never flinched. We were not going to change our story. We had come to the conclusion that a very clever, nasty Sasquatch had terrorized us, but we were not going to tell anyone about this, because I assure you, they would never have believed us. Yes, they knew we were lying. Who cares about that? But telling them the truth would have made us look ridiculous. As for Will the farmer, he was so terrified of the events on his land that he hired a security guard to guard his barns at night, but days later only a single hand belonged to the guard was found dangling on the barn door. I think it was the creature telling the farmer who was boss. Sadly, Will ended up selling his land and buying a farm in North Carolina, and I hope he has never had to go through what he went through again, because it put the fear of God in him as it did for us. Ryan and I attended trauma counselling together, and now we have come to terms with what we experienced on that horrendous night, when our understanding of reality was permanently shifted. I hope your readers found my story interesting, and I hope other people hiding their Sasquatch encounters for fear of being ridiculed will come forward and tell their story. But believe me, it's a courageous thing to do. But with the assurance of remaining anonymous, what have we got to lose? That is the way I see it. Fond regards, Harry. Harry, I want to just thank you so very much for such a fabulous and fascinating story. It is true that you do get some very dangerous Sasquatch. It's extraordinary the kind of encounters that people have had. There are people who've had wonderful encounters with these hairy creatures, people who've had horrifying encounters with them, and this certainly was the latter. I mean, this creature was clearly terrifying. I think that thing that absolutely amazed me about your story was the way the creature was just so incredibly strong, the way he was pulling up these rafters from the roof as if they were nothing. And, that would take several men to just pull out a single rafter, and he's tearing it out as if it's nothing. But clearly these creatures are extraordinarily strong. And I would say that he was a hefty fella at 1,000 pounds, I imagine. So he was a big creature. Yeah, I would have been terrified of him. So I can understand why the farmer moved away. That was a wise thing for him to do, because you never know, that creature could have returned. And maybe there are other stories that other people had with this creature. I shouldn't wonder. It's all about seasonal work in Alaska, because a lot of people go to Alaska during the summer months when we don't have the COVID-19 crisis, of course, and they get jobs there. And there's so many jobs that you can get. And this lady got herself a job as working as a waitress, but she played a flute and she had an experience with a Bigfoot. So I know you're going to enjoy this story, so let's get started. But before we do, I'd love you to subscribe to my channel, because I have got so many wonderful stories that you're going to absolutely love. So let's get started. Dear Sarah and all your lovely listeners, my name is Tori, and my Bigfoot encounter happened to me in Alaska. I live in Los Angeles, but I'm an outdoorsy type of person who simply loves adventure and exploring, and I decided that I really wanted to visit Alaska because it is a part of North America that has always intrigued me. I knew that it could be expensive to go there for a holiday, but I decided to go there as a seasonal worker for 4 months, and that way I would get to see this beautiful part of North America. You see, there's so many seasonal jobs during the summer months that you can apply for, because the summer is the time when tourists from all over the world visit Alaska. You can imagine how many extra jobs the summer months create, and so Alaska has to recruit outside help to manage those many jobs. I got a job as a waitress serving all the tourists that visit Juneau at this one particular place. I was also given board there and included meals. I really enjoyed my job, even though it was hard work, because Alaska is a beautiful place and the locals are the most amazing, down-to-earth people that you can ever hope to meet. I was fortunate enough to make friends with a girl whose family lived in a remote cabin in the Alaskan wilderness. Her parents were flying to Boston to see some relatives, and they needed someone to take care of their dog while they were away, and what's more, they would pay me well. This seemed the perfect opportunity for me to experience what life in a cabin in the middle of nowhere was like. It was something that I've always wanted to experience. My friend explained the importance of carrying a rifle with me at all times, and how to use it for my own protection should the need arise. The dog I was looking after was a retired sleigh dog, and his name was Gabs, and he was a beautiful, sensitive creature, and from the moment I met him, we bonded. The cabin was much more cosy than I'd ever imagined a cabin to be. I was expecting it to be very rustic and austere, but on the contrary, it was really cosy and very stylishly decorated. The bedroom was the cosiest room in the cabin, with a beautiful, large, open stone fireplace, and the largest bed I have ever seen. I kid you not, it was equivalent to 2 king-size beds married together. So I imagine they had all their linen handmade. The views outside the cabin were spectacular, and there were trees scattered all over the landscape, absolutely everywhere. That night I went to bed in the most comfortable bed I have ever slept in my life, and despite how enormous the bed was, Gabs lay at my feet. I awoke to hear a whooping sound coming from outside the cabin, and it seemed quite close. I was not au fait with animal sounds, and so I wondered what creature could have made a sound like that. I had no clue. The next morning I woke up, had breakfast, took Gabs for a walk, and finally sat outside a tree with Gabs lying by my feet, and I practiced my flute. I've been playing the flute all my life, and I love it so very much. And so I started to play some of my favourite pieces that I know by heart. Sometimes I get so lost in the memento of the music that I can play for hours. Suddenly something seemed to be humming to my music, especially when I hit the more sombre B- notes. Whatever it was clearly was enjoying my music. I looked around to see who was humming, and I saw this huge black creature that resembled a black bear at first glance. But as I looked closer, I could see that he was anything but a bear. The creature was humanoid in its body shape, only giant-like in comparison to human proportions. It also had much longer arms than we do, as well as a head with an unusual cone shape to it, and it had these bright brown sparkling eyes that looked so kind. Well, at least that's what I thought. Whatever this creature was, he was enjoying and loving my flute music, and I continued to play, all the while watching him in awe. This creature continued to hum, and he swayed his head in time to the music, and he was appreciating it so very much. I kept asking myself, what in the world is this thing that I am seeing before me? I did not feel fear of this creature because of its humanness, despite the fact that it was enormous. And although it had human-like traits, it did have a trait of the large gorilla, the kind that you see on Animal Planet. When I stopped playing, the creature looked very disappointed, and he waved his hands in a funny way as if to say, carry on. So I found myself playing more music, much to his delight, and I watched him close his brown eyes tightly and continuing humming to himself. He really was so responsive to my music, much more so than a human audience has ever been. Once I'd finished playing, he was gone from my sight. The next day, when I went to play the flute, I heard a loud rustling sound, and then, standing before me were 2 of these creatures. I think the creature from the day before had brought a friend to listen to my flute, and he was as responsive, if not more so, to my music. Before long, the 2 of them were humming and swaying their heads in time to my flute. I forgot to mention, every night I would hear those whooping sounds outside my cabin. On the final day I was staying at the cabin, the 2 creatures were waiting for me to play the flute. I could see them outside the kitchen window. They were chattering excitedly to each other like human beings who are looking very forward to something. I went out to play my flute for what seemed to be the last time, because I would return to my seasonal waitressing job in Juneau and finally fly back home to Los Angeles. I asked my friend what the giant animals were that I saw outside the cabin, and she asked me to describe them to her, and she told me that I must have encountered Bigfoot and drawn them out of the forest with my music. I was told that they are normally so elusive, so I was extremely privileged to get to see them. To have seen them and to have spent a few days in that cabin in the Alaskan wilderness with the beautiful sleigh dog Gabes was wonderful. That time was one of the most beautiful times in my life. I hope you and your listeners enjoyed my story. What a lovely story. It seems that our Bigfoot enjoys B minor music. I'm so very glad you've joined me this evening, and I've got a wonderful story for you that you're really going to love. And it happened in Florence in Oregon, and it's a wonderful story about a policeman who had an encounter with a Bigfoot, and he's kept it under wraps for a very, very long time. Because the problem with being in the police force or any kind of position like that, sometimes if you were to mention to someone that you believe that Bigfoot was real, you could be laughed at. People would make fun of you and your credibility would be undermined. And it's crazy because these creatures are definitely real and there are definitely cover-ups going on. But I truly think that there are people out there that just would not relate to us believing that this creature is very definitely real. I know for a fact that I would never tell my mother that I believed in Bigfoot because she would laugh at me and find it hilariously funny. And I certainly wouldn't want that to happen. So I do relate to that. Anyway, so before we get started, do make sure that you subscribe to my channel. Dear Sarah and all your listeners, I've seen that some on your channel have been courageous enough to share their horrifying experience with the creature called Bigfoot, especially fellow police officers like myself. It made me feel that if they could be plucky and courageous enough to share their Bigfoot encounter with you, then so should I. Naturally, I want to remain anonymous. It's a priority for someone in my profession, which I believe your listeners will appreciate and understand. My encounter happened in Florence, Oregon. The property in question was a medium-sized family cabin that was situated on Wohink Lake with 400 feet of lakefront frontage that could be enjoyed from a huge wooden deck that surrounded the cabin, offering the most glorious views over the lake. There was also a back garden of about 150 acres with areas of ubiquitous trees of every kind that were scattered everywhere on this rural location, making it the ideal setting for all kinds of wildlife, including loads of free-range chickens that belonged to the owner. It was in 1987, in July of that year, that I got a phone call from a woman called Gillian, who was experiencing some strange activity on her property. When I arrived, I could see the relieved look on her face. "I'm so glad you're here," she said. "I really need to talk to someone about this." "Of course," I said. "How can I be of help?" Gillian looked at me with a little resistance, as if she had to be guarded about what she told me. "Look," she said, "every night there is the most dreadful pounding all over my cabin, almost like someone is hitting it violently with a metal pole. The sounds are quite frankly utterly terrifying. I did go out to see if anything was there, but it was deathly quiet outside. Not a sound could be heard, which is unusual. I mean, even the crickets weren't singing on that night. I got the distinct impression that someone was spying on me and hiding. I did hear heavy breathing, but I looked around and no one was there. I walked around the property and there was nothing, but I found 3 of my chicken heads just lying on the ground next to a huge pile of plucked feathers. It really was most bizarre." "Have you ever had anything happen like this before?" I asked. "No," said Gillian. "I can't say that I have. Do you know of any person that may wish to scare you?" "Well, there is my ex-husband, who is very bitter about our divorce, but I do not think he would stoop this low to try and scare me. Surely not." "You would be surprised," I said. "The stories I could tell you would make your hair curl about the revengers of exes." "You really think my ex-husband could be behind this?" she said, looking aghast. "He was very upset that I did get the cabin. I know that really put him out. But I never imagined he'd react like this and try and scare me half to death." "It's a distinct possibility," I said, "but it would be foolish for us to jump to conclusions too quickly. There could be multiple explanations for all this. Should I be worried? She asked me. Ma'am, I don't know at this stage, but call me any time, day or night, and I will be out here like a shot, I said. I examined her property for any telltale signs of the intruder, but frankly, all I noticed was a large footprint in the mud. That was very big, and it was of a bare foot. Ma'am, I said, just one more question. Does your husband have big feet? And does he ever go around without shoes on? Oh, he hates shoes, she said. He never wears them unless it's winter, of course. And yes, he's got big feet. He's 6 foot, you know. How did you know that? Nothing, I said. I was just wondering. I was now convinced that her husband was trying to scare her. Maybe he was angry about her getting the cabin in the divorce settlement and was trying to drive her away from her property so that he could get his greedy hands on it. It was a really beautiful cabin with sensational views. I couldn't blame him for wanting it. I fancied it myself. That night the woman called me again, and this time she was freaking out. Someone had been screeching on her property like a banshee, and the dreadful banging was continuing and getting worse and worse, and someone had thrown a huge boulder through her window and shattered all the glass. I was at the property within minutes and was met by the woman sobbing uncontrollably, telling me that she had seen a monster with red eyes spying at her through the window and growling. You go inside, I said, trying to reassure her, and I will go and investigate. I immediately suspected that the husband was hiding on the property, and I realized that he was a really nasty fellow, putting on a scary mask in order to drive his wife from her cabin. I had seen some nasty husbands in my time, but this took the biscuit with this level of spite. I walked around the rural property with the rambling shrubbery, long grass and beautiful abundant trees. I was lighting up the area with my torch, looking to see if I could detect any noises. It seemed incredibly quiet, almost eerily so, and there were no animal sounds, which was odd for a rural setting. Come out, Mr. Walker, I said. The game is up and I know you're there. You need to give up this ludicrousy of stalking your wife, or she'll fire a restraining order on you, and I will be charging you for wasting police time. So come out from your hiding place now. All was silent. There was no answer. Suddenly I saw a shadowy form peering at me from behind a tree, and now I knew Mr. Walker's hiding place, although I pretended not to have seen it. I decided I would pounce on Mr. Walker unaware and take him by surprise, and then I would cuff him and take him back to the station. So that's exactly what I did. I got on top of Mr. Walker and tried to hold him down, but he was so strong. I really thought it was Mr. Walker in a ghillie suit. Mr. Walker hurled me in the air like a pizza. I just went flying in the air, and I landed in the middle of a huge fish pond that I didn't even know was there. Neither did Mr. Walker, because he looked as surprised as I was. You see, the pond was covered in thick green water lilies. Sopping wet, I climbed out of the pond to face a fierce standoff with Mr. Walker. But now I knew this was not Gillian's husband, but a real-life monster, the likes of which I'd never seen before. Whatever on earth it was, my rifle had been lost after the creature had flung me into the air, and now I was totally defenseless. What on earth is this horrendous-looking thing, I wondered. The creature looked like he had these horrible black dreadlocks over his body, and they were matted and nasty, with a funky odour that was far from pleasant, like damp, sweaty, cheesy trainers. This creature was about 6.5 feet tall, with a huge chest almost as wide as he was tall, and long muscular legs, long arms, and a head that was shaped like one of my bullets. The creature was humanoid, with a distinct early man sort of appearance about him, with ape-like influences to his overall appearance. The creature let out the most horrendous scream and glared at me with his huge menacing red eyes. He then lifted up the left side of his lips and snarled at me, and I could tell in that instant that he was going to kill me. I did not have a shadow of a doubt in my mind. He lunged towards me and grabbed me with a huge hand with fingers like pork sausages. He suddenly let go of me when he heard the sound of a rifle being unloaded and aimed directly at him, and one of the bullets hit him in the upper leg, and the creature winced with pain and let go of me, and then he went thundering through the undergrowth like an angry rhino. "Thank you," I said as Gillian approached me with her rifle in hand. "I think you just saved my life. That was an excellent shot." "Oh," she said, "that's nothing. I'm quite good with a gun, even if I say so myself. I was just in no doubt that he was going to kill you. I was watching him from the kitchen window, and what a stroke of luck that you ended up in my pond, or I think we would not be talking now. I didn't even know the pond was even here." "I know," she apologized. "I always forget to tell people it's there, and they invariably always fall in because they don't see it. I've been meaning to clean it out for a long time." "It's a good thing you didn't," I said. So that was my Bigfoot story. I got in touch with Gillian, and over the last few years, she had no further sightings of the creature. That gunshot scared him off for good. We both realized after our research that we had indeed encountered a Sasquatch, and both of us decided that if we told anyone about it, we would be ridiculed. Gillian has agreed that I can share my story with you today, provided, of course, that our identities are not revealed. I hope you found my stories of interest. That was a wonderful story, and of course I just want to say identities are always going to be kept secret, so don't worry about that. None of your details will be made known to anybody. Confidentiality and discretion is the name of the game in this business. And all I just want to say is that that was an amazing story. I really loved that story, and I loved the way that the woman happened to have a husband who was 6 foot tall, who had big feet, and the policeman sees these big feet and just absolutely assumes that her husband is stalking her and trying to scare her with a ghillie suit and trying to terrify her through the window, and he's thinking that this guy is a terrible guy and he's about to pounce on him, and he does, and he finds himself wrestling with a Sasquatch. I mean, what a story. I thought that was a phenomenal story. I shan't be forgetting that in a hurry. I'm so glad you've joined me this evening. I've got such a great story for you that you're absolutely going to love. I absolutely love the story myself because I couldn't believe what I was reading, and it was all about this young girl of 10 years old who gets to see a Sasquatch at really close proximity. So can you imagine what that must have been like? That must have been such an exciting experience. I know I would have been so excited. And she gets to see the Sasquatch literally looking at her baby sister with so much love. So these creatures can be incredibly loving. And then, of course, she has another experience, but it's not with a Sasquatch personally. It's somebody else who she meets at the hospital as a nurse, who is the victim of a Sasquatch attack, and he gets to tell her his story. So I really think you're going to like this story, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel because I've got so many more stories that you're just going to love. So let's get started. Dear Sarah and all your listeners, I'm writing to tell you about 2 Bigfoot encounters, one I experienced personally and another that I learnt about from a patient of mine. It is imperative that my details remain confidential, otherwise I would not even consider telling my story that I have kept secret for many long years. I am from Somerville in West Virginia. I was born in the late 60s and grew up in the 80s and 90s, and I had a really wonderful childhood growing up in the heart of the Virginia countryside. One day, when I was about 10 years old, I fell asleep in a beautiful hammock on the large wooden deck that surrounded our Cape Cod-style home. The pram with my 3-month-old baby sister was only a foot away from the sliding door, and my mother felt safe leaving it there, provided I kept an eye on the baby. That afternoon it was a lovely spring day, and we had spent the whole day on the deck, enjoying the sunshine, eating a casual lunch, and enjoying some quiet time reading books. I had been lying in the hammock and could feel drowsiness take over my body and the desire to just fall asleep. My eyelids were becoming heavy. I heard my mother's voice and missed those early stages of falling asleep. "Look after Pippa, won't you? I'm going to prepare tonight's dinner." I think I nodded, and my mother retreated from the deck, satisfied that I would keep an eye on baby Pippa. I loved looking after my little sister, and it was fun helping my mother take care of her. It was growing dark outside, and I had fallen into a deep sleep. I woke up to hear my baby sister chuckling, and I assumed my mother was holding her. Imagine my surprise when I opened my eyes to see this tall, dark, large humanoid figure covered in black, scraggly, long hair, holding the baby at about 6 foot in the air and bobbing her up and down in such a loving way. Little Pippa was loving the fuss and chuckling in rapturous delight. I was so shocked that I just stared in disbelief at what I was seeing, and I was convinced I was still fast asleep, but I realized suddenly that I was very much awake, and what I was seeing was indeed real. What the heck is this creature, I wondered. It was not a bear, that was for certain. The creature was female because she had breasts, and I think she was between 7.5 to 8 foot tall. She had a large torso area, especially the shoulders and arms, that were dense in muscle. The legs and arms of the creature were long and human-like, and she had hands and feet, just like we do. The head was shaped like a cone, and the hairless face was like a primate with human-like characteristics. I do not believe the creature knew I was there, because I was well hidden at the bottom of a huge hammock, and she never appeared to notice me. She was so absorbed by the baby. I watched her place the baby in the pram and pushing the pram backwards and forwards rhythmically to help the baby sleep. Her brown eyes studied little Pippa with so much love, and it was mesmerizing to watch. All this time, I was so tongue-tied that I was unable to cry out to my mother. Suddenly I heard my mother approaching. "Hi, hon! How's Pippa doing?" Before I could answer, the creature hurled itself over a 7-foot drop from our patio to the ground with extraordinary grace, and then she darted off and was gone in 3 strides of her long, hairy legs. "Oh, there you are, hun," said my mum, leaning over in the pram to pick up baby Pippa. "Look what an amazing babysitter you are. I do not hear Pippa crying, not once. Look at her, she's chuckling. You're a natural," she said. I looked at my watch, and with horror I realized I'd been asleep for 3 hours, and I wondered how long the creature had been on our patio. I didn't want to dare to think about that. I never told anyone what I'd seen, especially not my mother. She had left me in charge of baby Pippa, and the baby had been watched over by a Bigfoot. Imagine if my mother had known that. She would have never allowed me to look after Pippa ever again, and that would have been terrible. I do believe the Bigfoot was just being maternal. If she had wanted to steal the baby, she'd run off with it anyway, and she never did. It does not excuse the fact, though, that I fell asleep when I was supposed to be looking after my sister. Years passed, and I long since forgot that incident, keeping it well at the back of my mind. I ended up becoming a nurse in West Virginia hospital, and believe me, I adored my job. I've always been the kind of person that could get people to open up when others couldn't. Whenever there was a patient that was not talking due to trauma or perhaps was painfully shy, I was the one that was asked by the staff to go and talk to that person. One day, I was asked by a doctor to go and speak to an 11-year-old boy who hadn't spoken for days. He had come into hospital with multiple injuries and a near-fatal bleed, as well as 1 foot dangling off the end of his ankle. No one knew what had happened to him, and whatever he was traumatized, and his parents just could not get a word out of him. I found out from the parents that the boy loved dogs and had begged his parents for a puppy of his own. I thought this would be the perfect tool to get my patient to talk to me. "Hello," I said, entering the room with a bright, cheerful voice. I sat down near the boy, and he refused to look at me, but stared blankly into space. "I hear you love animals, especially dogs," So do I. I'm crazy about dogs. Maybe I'll get your parents to get you a puppy if you tell me what happened to you. Look at you, you're in a big mess. You certainly had a harrowing ordeal, didn't you? What happened? If I tell you, you promise I'll get a puppy, he said. I can't promise you that, but I promise you I'll do my level best to persuade your parents to get you one. My words seemed to convince him. Well, you won't believe me if I told you, he said. You'll think I'm making up all kinds of porkies. Try me, I said. I have an open mind, you know. What happened? The doctors tell me you're lucky to be alive. One of your bleeds narrowly missed an artery, and if you'd bled out, you definitely wouldn't have survived. I thought it was going to kill me, he said, starting to tremble. Someone did this to you? I said. You need to report this man to the police. He'll go down for attempted murder. He can't get away with this. You must tell us who it is. It wasn't a human, said the boy. What was it? I asked. A bear? A mountain lion? A black panther? I think it was a Bigfoot. As he said those words, I felt a chill going down my spine as I recalled my own experience of the creature. You see, you don't believe me, just as I thought, he said. I do believe you, I said. I've also seen one, so I know they're real. You've seen one, he said. You believe me? I have seen one, and I do believe you, and they are real. But you must remember there are people out there who will never believe you. So you have to be careful who you tell. That's what I thought, he said. I know my parents won't believe me. They definitely will think I'm lying. Well, I can tell you how to make up a story that they will believe, I said. You'll help me do that? Of course I will, I said. But first, tell me what happened. I was on our farm. I saw some deer hiding in our rusty trailer. They are wild and normally afraid of humans, but they weren't worried about me, and I got close to them. They were 2 deer, and I promise you they were so frightened. I knew something was terrorizing them, and they were hiding from it. I've never seen deer like that before, and I knew that there was a predator of some kind that was stalking them. And I kind of wanted to protect them, you know what I mean? So I started firing my dad's rifle towards the forest. I thought that whatever was after them would be scared off. And I just felt sorry for the deer. The next thing I knew, I heard this almighty growl. It was so frightening. So I just continued to shoot. And one of my bullets hit the thing. It was like this big black mass standing there in the woods. And it winced. I heard it crying in pain, and I knew I'd hit it. And then it just wanted revenge. So it came rearing towards me, and it happened also very fast. The creature got hold of me, he grabbed my foot, and it was like he was wrenching it off, and it nearly came off my leg. And then he stomped on me with one of his legs, and his legs were so enormous, they were huge. You know, he stood on me just like you stand on an ant or a beetle and you crush it under your feet. That's how he stood on me. I was so terrified. I was screaming, and then I heard my dad running towards me, and the creature just ran. When he saw my father, he ran. I don't think my father even saw the creature. He was that fast. So your father saved your life? It would seem so, said the boy. I think the creature was going to squash me to death, you know. Did you get a look at him? I did, but it happened so fast. He was black and hairy and big and very smelly, and he had a primate face. That's the part I did get to see, and also I could tell he was livid with me. I believe you did indeed see the hairy man. You saw a Sasquatch, all right. We both decided to tell his parents that he had been attacked by a bear, and they believed his story, and yes, they did buy him a puppy. I gather he was given a yellow Labrador that he called Boris. So that's the end of my story. I hope your listeners found it of interest. Oh, I definitely found your story fabulous. I just love it when you hear stories of Sasquatch showing a really maternal side, and you do tend to find that it's the female Sasquatch that are very gentle towards children and very gentle towards human children as well. This isn't the first time I've heard stories like this, so I don't think that that Sasquatch would in any way have harmed that child, not from what I've heard. But the other story was clearly a Bigfoot. I think he was really angry because he was hit by a bullet, and he probably wouldn't have done anything, but I think because he was struck by that bullet, I think he decided he was so angry at that, he wanted revenge on the person that had attacked him. So that's why he attacked that boy. And it seems that that boy was extremely lucky to get away with his life, because I think if his father hadn't come out as quickly as he did, I think that that boy would not be alive to tell his story. So in fact, he did get off lightly, although it sounds like the Sasquatch very nearly, destroyed one of his arteries, which could have meant he was killed, but luckily he wasn't. So I have to say, I'm really pumped up by that story. That story's really got me going. Wow, that was some story. I really enjoyed it, and I hope you guys did too. Well, hello there. I hope you enjoyed the omnibus edition. We've got many more coming our way for you to listen to. Sending you love wherever you are in the world, in North America, Canada, Kenya, wherever you may be. I send you lots and lots of love. Thank you for listening to my omnibus, and I really do hope you enjoyed it, because that's the whole idea about it, is to give you some interesting stories to listen to. So until next time, goodbye and good night.